But we are going to start with that Saturday lunchtime fixture yesterday afternoon as Manchester United beat Tottenham Hotspur. Christian Romero, the Spurs captain, sent off once again. Dan, actually important that the key point to make already is that you've attacked the pastry, because a lot of people who watch at home think that these are purely decorative. But you went straight in before 9 o'clock.
They're not for show.
They're not for show. And I think it's important to make that point, isn't it? To less serious news, let's talk about the game from yesterday. In the Sun, the top line of it from Tom Barkley, James, knee-jerk or not, it must be getting tempting now, is the reference to Michael Carrick making it 4 games in a row. Given the way he started, do you think he's making it easier or harder for Manchester United's hierarchy?
Harder, undoubtedly. Because if they really thought Michael Carrick was the right man, they would have given him the job permanently. Fact of the matter is, what he's doing at the moment is absolutely maximising an opportunity to return Manchester United to some sort of default setting, which is playing the system they want to play, putting the academy players back into the setup, putting just simply the best players in the best positions, which is what Ruben Amorim was so resistant to doing for so long. And I think probably one of the biggest aspects is that he's been bold with a lot of his substitutions. And we saw that when they beat Arsenal, that at 2-2, they were still trying to play on the front foot. They weren't regressing, which is what they used to do a lot under Ruben Amorim. And again, yesterday against Spurs, they kept, obviously they had the man advantage, but they kept making positive changes, kept trying to be on the front foot. And the bar is so low at Manchester United these days that is enough to start to make it look like progress. But I have to say, I still doubt whether Michael Carrick is the man who's going to bring back the league title to Manchester United. It feels very Ole Gunnar Solskjaer 2.0 to me, and that what he's done is he's given the players a sense of freedom. You see sort of, the Rabona from Fernandes in the second half, and the players sort of playing this one-touch stuff, which is great, and he's liberated them a little bit. But that is a short-term feeling, and the challenge for the hierarchy is to compartmentalise that and not get carried away by it.
And that is the difficulty, isn't it? And the balancing act that I guess people like Omar Barada and Jason Wilcox have to strike a little bit. And I remember saying on Sky Sports News on the day that he was given the job, Carrick, is it an adult conversation that is being had here and said, look, it is 15, 16 games and that is it, no matter how well you do. But if he suddenly reels off 12, 13 wins, it does become a lot more difficult to not give him the job, doesn't it? Or should they stick with their guns? If they thought it's short term, it is short term.
No, I don't think they should stick to their guns. I think they should give him the job. I mean, if he'd been parachuted in April and it'd been 5-6 games and they'd won all of them, and maybe they'd have thought, well, he needed longer. Well, it's quite a long time in a season. A lot can happen. So, if he's done it over several months, and looking at what he's doing, bringing in a really good assistant manager in Steve Holland, I don't think we should underestimate what a huge, massive impact he will have. Both just basic coaching, of course, but just everything we saw with England, the culture, and we know the culture's been wrong at Manchester United. So to bring that in, which Gareth Southgate probably would have done had he been given the chance at Man United, which I thought might happen when Dan Ashworth was there, but obviously Steve Holland is there now, albeit with a different coach. But he'll have a huge impact, and it's obvious that Maguire's back in the team, Luke Shaw, Kobe Mainu. Maybe one of those three could get into the World Cup squad because they were all been out of the reckoning, and ultimately if United get those results, I think Carrick has to have the job.
It's interesting that James was talking about it being Ole Gunnar Solskjaer 2.0, and the quotes from Bruno Fernandes says Michael has won everything here. He knows what it means to the fans, he knows what it means to the club, and knows how much you need to win here. I think that adds something special to the team. And the criticism was when firstly it was Darren Fletcher, then it became Michael Carrick, that this is just the Manchester United routine, that anytime something goes vaguely wrong, you think, well, someone who knows Fergie slightly, just give him the job for a bit and it will go back to the good old days.
Yeah, I noticed Roy Keane saying he wouldn't give him the job even if he won every game between his appointment and the end of the season, which I think speaks to this anxiety that is going to be Solskjaer 2.0, to James's point, that they've been here, they've kind of done this and it didn't work. I noticed United didn't give him the interim tag. They didn't say Michael Carrick's the interim manager or head coach. They said he's the manager until the end of the season. So they've left themselves some wiggle room there perhaps to to make that appointment and just extend his contract if it goes really well. I think we have to reserve judgment because he has been a breath of fresh air. It is new manager bouncy, I think. You know, he's freed up the players. He's played people like Fernandes in their proper position. So no wonder Fernandes is giving him a ringing endorsement. You know, he's back at number 10. He's put faith in academy players. He's brought players back in. So he's done a lot of simple things to dramatically improve the side. But there is an element of that kind of freshness and the players being liberated from Amorim and his system, which I think obviously wasn't working. So let's see how it goes. But they've got a 40-game season. I think they should be targeting second. They've got the time on the training pitch that we talked about with Amorim a lot, but I think Carrick will probably use that better than Amorim was doing and would have done. So look, let's see how it goes. And I think, you know, to Charlie's point, if they keep winning, it'll be very hard not to give him the job.
Is the counter argument to that what he's actually doing is returning Manchester United to the mean? That if we all did our 1 to 20s at the start of the season, you probably would have said somewhere between 3rd and 6th is where they would be.
Well, let's not forget that near the end of Amorim's time at United, he went to a back four briefly, and they actually looked all right. And then he went back to the 3. And I like Michael Carrick, and I want him to do well. I'm glad he's doing well. But he's not the man long term for Manchester United.
As in someone who can deliver a title.
If Manchester United want to get back to winning titles, they've got to look to a bigger name than Michael Carrick. What you're seeing now is a product of a team that is being well coached, and Charlie's absolutely right. Steve Holland is the best appointment they could have made in that coaching staff, really, alongside Carrick. He's, you know, there's a clarity of thought. There's an important kind of distinction there with the culture of what you can see now versus what you can see before. And look, Michael Carrick knows the club, United DNA, all that sort of stuff. It is a factor. But this is a short-term bounce. This is a club that's been through this process before with Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. They know how this plays out. They will reach a ceiling with him, and it won't get any higher than that.
They've also been through big name managers before, though, and it hasn't worked.
Yeah, but this is why I don't necessarily see the argument of like a sort of a Carlo Ancelotti coming in, a sort of figurehead, unless you've got that is a team that needs to be coached, and it also is a team that needs to sort its recruitment out. And they also are playing 1 game a week at the moment. They're going to play 40 games this season, the fewest they've played in decades. They've got a single purpose at the moment, and that really, Michael Carrick that's what I meant at the start, is by maximising this opportunity. They have a single purpose, 1 competition, 1 game a week, 1 focus. And Michael Carrick is absolutely getting the best out of United at the moment in that environment. When you go back to 3 games a week, to trying to win silverware, and the margins get tighter at the top end of the game, that's where you want someone with that pedigree to get United back. I just feel Carrick is the perfect moment for now, but not for the future.
But in terms of, you know, we're all sort of, you know, looking at is history repeating itself with Solskjaer, aren't we? Equally, you know, you could look at Arteta, and he's been brought in at Arsenal. He's not managed before. You know, obviously assistant to Guardiola, or just because he was Pep Guardiola's assistant doesn't mean that he was going to be a great manager. We didn't really know. So he's more inexperienced than Carrick, and obviously Arteta didn't have the experience of Steve Holland, and he's obviously been given a lot of money, but he's been given time, and he's going to win a title. So, you know, there is a sort of a counter argument to the Solskjaer comparison, isn't it? That if he is good enough, and obviously we've yet to find out Carrick, but I think his lack of experience doesn't bother me when there are more sort of, you know, inexperienced managers being given time at big clubs.
I guess there is also the counter argument that just because there have been big name managers there before that haven't worked, that's not to say that if they went and now they're planning properly and thinking that there is this moment now where Michael Carrick takes it to the end of the season, he gets them into the Champions League as he perhaps should with the squad he's got, but really the focus is on getting someone like a Thomas Tuchel or a Ancelotti or whoever it might be, because everyone knows that there could be this huge market for elite managers once the World Cup is done.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I say is, like, United finished, 15th or 16th last season?
15th.
So, you know, the suggestion that their kind of rightful place in the pecking order is sort of 3rd or 4th, I think, you know, that's probably a sort of antiquated view. Like, that would be a massive improvement for him to get them up there. Albeit they spent a lot of money in the summer. So I think that would be a good finishing position for them if they can get them back in the Champions League. I think there are inherent risks with like any managerial appointment, and you look at the managerial market right now and it's not great. I think it will improve after the World Cup. As you say, Tuchel, possibly Pochettino, possibly Ancelotti, people like that could come on the market. But United won't be the only club in for a new manager in the summer. There's a lot of talk about Pep Guardiola's position at Manchester City, Slot at Liverpool, Thomas Frank at Tottenham, maybe even Eddie Howe at Newcastle as well. So there are kind of no guarantees. As I said, I think we've got to wait and see kind of how Carrick continues to operate, how it goes, but so far so good.
Let's say the opposite to so far so good, Dan, and move on to Spurs. Martin Samuel's piece puts juice down, ready to make serious points about Tottenham. Romero isn't a rebel or a hero, he's a liability who should go. Martin goes on to say Romero isn't the outspoken champion of the resistance at Tottenham, he isn't a rebel or a hero, he's a liability. This was the sixth sending off of his Tottenham career, a dereliction of duty for the club captain as he is now. He had a lot to say during the week. Can you get away with saying quite so much if your own performances aren't up to scratch?
At the moment, he's a nightmare on and off the pitch, I think. And I would kind of separate the two things. I think I have mixed feelings about him calling out the club, as he's consistently done and as he did just after the transfer deadline. I think that's not a great look for a captain, obviously, but there is an accountability problem at Tottenham. It's not just at Tottenham, it's across the Premier League. Executives, owners don't speak enough. It's very hard for us in the media to hold these people to account because they don't open themselves up to accountability, and it's difficult in other ways for supporters to hold them to account. So if someone like Romero, who's got clout and status among the fan base and is a World Cup winner, feels that standards are slipping, then I don't have a huge problem with him coming out and saying that. The problem is, and Martin Samuel makes this point, when Harry Kane was calling out standards, he was holding himself to impeccably high standards. He was brilliant on the pitch. He was the model professional off it. And at the moment, Romero, is not. He's actually, notwithstanding his goals, which have been great, I think is having a pretty poor season defensively. He's a liability in terms of his discipline. And Spurs at the moment, the best thing about Spurs are these young players. Archie Gray, Odegaard, Bergvall. They need leadership. They need guidance. The last thing they need is the kind of hothead captaining the side. So I think Spurs have got a problem. I think Frank now is damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. He doesn't really have the political capital to strip the captaincy from him because he's not popular with fans, and Romero is. Nor do Vinay Venkatesham or the owners, really. They're equally unpopular. But if he leaves him with the armband, then I think he looks weak. So it's a real mess, and it's just another problem Spurs have in a really difficult season.
Just on what Dan was saying there about the reason for Christian Romero doing it, and it's sort of being seen as, oh, he's taking a stance because he feels standards are slipping. Is the counter argument to that, it's a little bit like, oh, it's not our fault, like we've not been helped by the board here, and us poor players are being left with just 12 of us to fight on, and actually the players haven't been good enough, and maybe because the players and also at times the manager have been so used to everything being Daniel Levy's fault that when he's not there to chuck the blame at, some of the frustration starts to go elsewhere, including on the players. Yeah,
I mean, when you call the board out like that publicly, you absolutely have to back it up on the pitch yourself. And Romero's not doing that. I wonder, and I don't know this, but I wonder whether there have been certain promises made to him that he feels haven't been kept. At the back end of last season, it looked like he was going to go to Atletico Madrid. I think he spoke in April publicly about how he'd like to play in La Liga one day. And then all of a sudden in August, he signs a new contract and he's made captain when Son Heung-min leaves. So, look, I mean, when he's come out and he sort of talked about, I think it was within an hour of the window closing, he was talking about, sort of going for the board. You sort of think, okay, I wonder if you sign that new deal on the basis that you've been told we're bringing in players, or there's been a kind of pitch to him about the ambition of the club, and they felt that the players feel that hasn't been executed, and then that would manifest itself again when they've got injuries, to sort of say, well, look, you didn't strengthen the squad and this has left us exposed. And it will be that element of it, if that is the case, that will resonate with the supporters, because of course they feel that there's not been enough investment or the right recruitment in the team over a number of years. And I think this speaks to the wider point about Spurs at the moment, is that it looks a bit rudderless as a club, and I think Ivan Ketchum's gone in and he's trying to sort that out, but of course above him they've got the Lewis family that have come in and been more prominent this season. Daniel Levy's left, they've got a new chairman as well, and then a new management, and all these kind of changes, and I think the players feel, based on what Romero's saying, that it all feels a little bit lost, and that leads to instability off the pitch and on the pitch. And I think there's a recognition from Thomas Frank and from the decision makers above him that there's quite a bit of pain to go through, and I think that's why they don't want to necessarily get rid of Thomas Frank. They've sort of resisted the temptation to do it when they could have done it already. But if he keeps losing games like this, and the atmosphere at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium continues to be as toxic as it is, there's only one person who's going to get changed, and that will be the manager.
Do you think part of the problem is perception with Tottenham? And we're going to talk about Newcastle in the next part, and that maybe Spurs fans see a club like Newcastle, Aston Villa being the other example, who want to spend more money and keep reminding us that they're being hamstrung by these financial rules that are in place, whereas some Tottenham fans see there's actually a lot of money there, but maybe not the desire to spend as much of it as fans would like. And obviously fans always want to spend more money than owners, in the sense that it's not their money, but there is perhaps a lack of ambition, a perceived lack of ambition.
Well, they've spent a lot of money on a lot of rubbish, and that's Daniel Levy's fault. And that's why a player like Conor Gallagher now is the sort of profile that, in terms of personality, character.
Is that Daniel Levy's fault, or is that someone like Paratici's fault or Johan Langer's fault?
I think he had such a strong presence at that club that regardless of who was allegedly making those decisions, I think Daniel Levy had a lot of power, and I think Thomas Frank underestimated what a toxic dressing room it was when he went in there. I thought Thomas Frank was a good appointment. I really did. So I think I'm wrong there, because maybe he's just not big enough. It wasn't big enough, or isn't big enough to deal with an incredibly difficult situation. I'm not sure which managers could cope with that. To be honest, because you've got a lot of players who quite clearly don't want to be there, but ultimately I think quite a few players that just don't care. And I think that's really pretty obvious that they just don't care. We've seen the body language from some of the players, and when they walked off the pitch, and a couple of them, not shaking Frank's hands and all that sort of rubbish. So it's.
Do you not think, Charlie? I think this about Romero. He seems to me to be a product of his environment. When he's playing in an Argentina team that are trying to win the World Cup, he doesn't put a foot wrong, and when he's trying to win the Europa League, he's impeccable. And then when it's all crumbling around him, he does what he did on.
But whose fault's that then?
Well, I think there's an element of the players just reflecting the environment they're in. I think if they don't care, it's because, as James says, that there's just a lack of structure and leadership and ambition and cohesion and all the rest of it around them, and it's just kind of leading to these sort of gutless performances. Really.
Do you think that there's an element there for them that? In a way, the players, it bleeds down from the top, as in the sense that, is Tottenham Hotspur's primary objective to be successful and win trophies, or is it to have a lovely stadium, stick Beyonce in the NFL on, and make a bit of money? Yeah,
well, that was the big question under Levy, and that was a big criticism of Levy, that he didn't want to win enough, and I think it was completely valid criticism, and I think that there's still that question. And look at Spurs now, and I just think, I don't know, and I'm for the record, I'm a Spurs supporter, but I look at them and I think, I don't know what kind of club Spurs are trying to be. Are they trying to be a club that actually wins things? Are they trying to be entertainers? Are they going for the trophies? Are they going for Champions League qualification? And it's just not clear kind of what their purpose is and what their kind of aims are. And again, I'm sure that filters down to the dressing room. I don't want to completely let the players off the hook. I think there are some poor players, and I think there are some poor attitudes there, but the fish rots from the head, and I think it's the problems at Spurs are from the top down, really, rather than the other way around.
Well, I think one other element of this that we shouldn't overlook was the takeover situation, and there was a lot of takeover talk. And as much as the club denied it, I think there was a desire among some to sell, and obviously that didn't happen. And now they've kind of shelved all the takeover talk, and Joe Lewis's family members have come in. And there's sort of talk about this new era and long term, and we're here, to stay and all this kind of stuff, which they've said, but I don't think they now know how to take the club forward. And I think it all stems from that. So this is a club that was getting to a point, and you talked about the new stadium, the training ground, it was an attractive business proposition to be sold. And I think they got it into a position where they were thinking about selling it. Now they're not, and they don't know how to take it on. And Thomas Franks walked into this situation above him and the situation below him, where, let's not forget, the last manager left with a trophy parade and thousands of people lining the streets of North London, and loads of the players coming out on social media and saying how great Ange was and everything he did for their careers and all this. So he's inherited that below him, and that above him. You can see why.
Mikel Arteta's work at Arsenal is being viewed in an even brighter light after the recent coaching shakeups elsewhere. With Chelsea parting ways with Enzo Maresca and Manchester United moving on from Ruben Amorim, the contrast is hard to miss. Arsenal has kept moving forward under Arteta, giving him time through difficult stretches, and now seeing the payoff as the club pushes again in the Premier League title race. It also raises a bigger question about strategy. While Chelsea and United are changing direction again, Arteta has been in place for more than 6 years, outlasting a long list of managers across those two clubs in that span. That stability has become part of the story, and it was a major talking point on the Seeing Red podcast with Tom Canton and John Cross. Beyond reacting to Amorim's dismissal and breaking down wins over Aston Villa and Bournemouth, plus Manchester City's loss to Chelsea, the conversation kept returning to one core idea: structure. Not just who is the coach, but how much power that coach has, and whether the club is built to support a long-term project. Cross pointed to Arsenal as a rare example of patience turning into real strength. He argued that Arsenal's willingness to back Arteta through the messy early phases helped create the stable position they're in now, and that this kind of time and support investment is what can turn a club into something truly solid. Canton's response was sharp and honest. Arteta's arc, he said, has almost become a problem for other clubs, because it tempts them to keep coaches they probably shouldn't. But at the same time, it's still the best example of what can happen when you hire the right person and actually give them time. And that time wasn't smooth. The discussion highlighted how Arsenal could easily have pulled the plug early. 2 8th-place finishes, then 5th, missing out on the Champions League, and a Europa League semi-final exit to Unai Emery's Villarreal. Any of those moments could have pushed a club into panic mode. Instead, the argument is that Arsenal recognized the bigger reality. Arteta didn't have the resources to compete at the required level right away. The squad needed a rebuild. The roster needed to be refreshed. That's where the comparison to Chelsea and United becomes even more pointed. The podcast suggested that recruitment and decision-making structure are often what determine whether a coach survives. If signings don't land, results suffer. And if a coach doesn't have enough influence, or the club isn't aligned behind a clear plan, it becomes much easier for things to collapse. In other words, giving time only works if the coach is empowered to shape the team in a way that matches the vision. Cross also emphasized that Arteta's situation stood out because he pushed to be a true manager, not just a head coach. The idea is simple. Top coaches want a real say in the build, and they want the club to match what they were promised when they took the job. The discussion even pointed to how Arteta survived a low moment, like the home loss to Burnley, because the club stayed behind him. And in that period, with fan pressure affected by the COVID-era environment, Arsenal were able to hold their nerve instead of reacting emotionally. Meanwhile, the big unknowns now shift back to Chelsea and Manchester United. Who replaces Amorim? And how will the next chapter look at Chelsea? The answers may come sooner than people expect. But for Arsenal, the reality stays the same. They're stable, they're moving forward, and they're still in the title chase, while others are starting over again. And that contrast can shape how people judge every manager in the league. Because when two massive clubs hit the reset button again, it forces the same question Cross raised on the show. Is the quick switch actually fixing the problem, or just delaying the real work? The bigger takeaway from the discussion is that time isn't a magic solution by itself. It only becomes valuable when the club's structure supports the plan, and when the coach has the influence to push the squad in the direction he believes it needs to go. That's why the distinction between head coach and manager kept coming up. The podcast point is that if a coach is expected to own the results, he usually wants a meaningful say in the decisions that shape those results. And if he doesn't get that, patience alone won't save him. That's also where Arteta's early struggles get reframed. Those finishes and setbacks could have become a reason to panic. Instead, they became evidence of why alignment matters, because Arsenal chose to treat them as part of a build, not a final verdict. And once the squad was reshaped the way the club believed it needed to be, the results started to reflect that long-term approach. So the repercussions aren't just about Arsenal looking stable, it's about how stability changes your margin for error. When you don't reset every year, you're not constantly starting from zero. You're building on decisions, learning from setbacks, and keeping a clearer identity. For Chelsea and Manchester United, the immediate consequence is obvious. They're changing direction again, which means the next appointment carries even more weight. Because every new coach isn't just judged on results. He's judged on whether the club is finally giving him the structure and authority that the role demands. That's why the question at the end matters so much. Who will replace Amorim, and how will Liam Rosenior do at Chelsea? Because those answers will test the exact theme the show kept returning to: time, support, structure, and control. And for Arsenal, it's a different kind of pressure. Stability doesn't guarantee trophies, but it does keep you in the fight longer. And right now, while others restart, Arsenal get to stay focused on what they're already doing, chasing the Premier League title.